My next guest is Rina Shah, a geopolitical strategist, investor, and entrepreneur. She is also a board member of the Represent Women initiative that helps women achieve gender parity in underrepresented spaces. Most recently, Rina is tying this to the tech and investment space. Welcome, Rina. It's great to see you.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you.
Okay, so Rina, you've got a lot of hats. You've had a lot of hats in your career. You've been a former political strategist, businesswoman, mother of three. How does that all help you in your position today?
Well, if I could weave my story well, I'd have to start back at when I was 19, and I'm not even 40 yet. So I'll tell you, it was a funny thing for me because at 19, I didn't consider myself a businesswoman. I considered myself someone that was good at doing something, and that something was editing resumes, writing, and I turned it into a business. I essentially created a career services company. And what I didn't realize at the time was doing what I love and getting paid for it would take me on a path to selling that business by the time I was in my mid-20s. I didn't realize what the future held for me on the internet. I was always a very online person, but at the age of 24, when I sold my business, it was to a couple I met from Craigslist. So Web 1 was a big impact in my life. I didn't realize that I could sell a business, create one, much less create one from scratch, but sell it. And all thanks to a company like Craigslist.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the emerging technologies? I just talked to Andre about this, but what that you have your eye on going into the new year and the next decade, really, of where we're going.
Well, like I said, with Web 1, I was a very interested party. And now here I am, an elder millennial. So you can assume already that I have been somebody that has Web 2 as very much a part of my life. Also as a mother, Web 2 applications, everything from Etsy to Amazon, anything, you name it, Instacart, it's all a part of my life. And startups for me are very, very natural because as a mother of three that are under the age of 5, I'm used to chaos and I have a high threshold for it. So I'm always looking to adapt. And I'm also looking at companies that are doing that well. They're adapting to what's happening. The market forces are, of course, forcing many companies to do the right thing in some cases. But of course, the pandemic era has had a real impact on how women who are, again, using technology to aid their daily lives, it has really created an opening for companies to come and speak directly to us. So if you ask me what gets me most excited in the morning, it's to see these founders that are out there who are quietly been operating for the past 4 years now see the fruits of their labor. And these are women often who come from underrepresented communities. I'm talking Black and brown women, even rural women. What happened in Web 2 is painting the picture for what could be really successful in Web 3. The emerging technologies I'm most excited about is definitely artificial intelligence. Machine learning is going to make our lives even better than we thought. So when I look at companies that are being founded by these underrepresented founders, I'm considering companies in healthcare. Those are the companies I'm adding to my portfolio right now, Bob. And I think it would be wise of more people to do so because coming out of the pandemic era restrictions, we're realizing how important health is. And when we have technology at our fingertips, whether it's through a watch or a wearable like I wear every day, tracking my steps, tracking my sleep, or just my phone, which it seems like I'm doing everything through these days, I know that my health is coming to be the center of everything. So the companies that are speaking to me about my health, even though they're not particularly healthcare centric, I'm really, really turned on by those. And I'm finding them to be the ones that are courting unique investments, whether they be from the West Coast or the East Coast, or even globally.
What you've had a lot of experience with startups. What's your kind of advice to people? It's always scary starting a startup. It's stressful, and it takes, as you alluded to before, it takes a little time for the payoff. Sometimes more than a little time for the payoff. What's your advice to people who are thinking about it but are a little anxious?
Like I mentioned earlier, I jumped into the startup world by creating one. But then I jumped out by going into politics and doing what I had studied and learned. I love the American presidency, and that drew me to Capitol Hill, actually, not to the executive branch. I spent time on Capitol Hill serving 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives and really got a feel for how Congress works and doesn't work. I understood what regulations can do to businesses, and I think that was my greatest takeaway. And when I left Capitol Hill, I went on to found my own small business. I created a political consulting practice. But it quickly became apparent to me as this young strategist in Washington that I wasn't going to make all my money through politics. I realized that helping startups navigate the complexities of Washington was something that I could also offer. And I was really drawn to that. It's really true when people talk about how crushing the overburdensome regulation coming out of Washington and out of state houses across the country can be to businesses. It's why 90% of startups also fail. Not just because they're leadership, not just because of money, but
Right.
it's because there's an environment out there that has made it tough for them to succeed. And that's a staggering statistic for a lot of people. Now, look, I'm not trying to blame everything on the government because I'm very much a lover of government. And when government does good and functions well, I think it's the best thing because it's serving the needs of an American founder well, is what we could do in this free and open, just society. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to this country, is because they can create a startup here literally from scratch while getting help from the federal government. But what I'm most concerned about, Bob, as we move towards another presidential election, is how our candidates talk about innovation and creation for today's founder. Earlier, I alluded to a founder that has probably been sitting on their idea and maybe quietly even toiling at it for 4 to 5 years now because of the slowdown of the pandemic era. We saw people really walk away from passion projects, but we also saw some other people draw in unique investments and enter new audiences while also bringing in new market share. I think that all can't be discounted by today's lawmakers and candidates. These people have to be able to speak to the new creator in America, and they've got to be able to take heed of what's gone well in Web 2. We've got to see who the losers and the winners have been. And frankly, Bob, one thing I'm most concerned about and why I put so much of my attention on women-led efforts is because women simply are not at the table enough when it comes to talking about the future of Web3 and other emerging technologies that will be encapsulated in Web3.
I wanted you to expand a little bit. When you talk to policymakers, based upon your experience in startups and red tape and Washington rules, what? And I know there's a lot. There's state rules, as you mentioned, but what's your advice? I mean, obviously, don't get in our way, but specifically, what do you think that regulators and Congress and the White House and the administration need to know about the difficulty of starting new businesses?
Well, it's that exact word right there, the difficulty. It's already so difficult to go out and talk about what's important to you and make somebody else be as excited as you are about what it is you've created, whether it's a service offering like I had created many years back or a product. I think in today's era, you can really do a hybrid of things, but how to get people to know your idea and love it just as much as you is always going to be a challenge. So the other forces that can be curbing innovation are simply the burdensome regulations that some of our agencies put on creators. So I think for policymakers, how they can best inform themselves is a prescription that I think we ought to really be talking about more in Washington. And that's a really highly paid innovation or tech fellow that sits in the halls of Congress and talks to some of these committees or sits in some of these personal offices. Now, I say highly paid because right now, pounding the pavement in Washington are a great many tech lobbyists. That is a challenge. There's an unfair balance out there. Right now, the average person, the average American consumer, the people's voice, so to speak, isn't really well equipped on Capitol Hill. That voice is the people who are informing our lawmakers are largely lobbyists, so special interests. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So I think creating this program of maybe what could be akin to a presidential leadership fellowship, but a tech fellowship in Congress could really help lawmakers understand some of these complexities that are, some of these founders are facing, but also helping them understand how to adapt new technologies and really weave those into some of these laws that they're creating from scratch. Because what they're having to do is meet the moment. And it's no secret, Bob, that right now we've got too many people in Congress that are not really speaking to Gen Z or millennials. So that's another issue, is that those people aren't the people utilizing the technologies that are out there that millennials like I'm using. They're not people who've gone to college with an email address like I did. And so therefore they're already kind of behind the learning curve. It's going to be greater for them. And I think these tech innovation fellows, who are again highly paid, in order to sort of balance the environment against tech lobbyists, that could really change the game in Washington.
You mentioned gender equality, and I want to talk about that and diversity. Where are we going? Are you seeing progress? Obviously, in a number of industries, especially in Washington and in Congress, you're seeing a lot of white men. What are we seeing a transformation in this space? And how do you get? I mean, how do you do it? How do you get more women involved? How do you convince them this is a great opportunity for you?
You get them involved by creating their own clubs. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm really encouraged by groups like, there are Women of Web3 out there. So many groups. You could just head up on Twitter and jump into a space any night of the week, frankly, because there are women out there creating NFTs and, again, non-fungible tokens. And you have people that have already got what would be considered solid startups in the Web3 space. It's a question of who's listening and who is also at their table. And it's not many men. So the women's clubs remain the women's clubs, and the old boys clubs, as they've been referred to, remain those old boys clubs. Until they merge and find a way to coexist, then we can't see the progress we want to see in places like New York or Los Angeles, much less here in Washington, D.C., where we have the regulators who are, like I mentioned earlier, just really behind the games because of things out of their control. So when we talk about power centers such as finance, we know that less than 20% of women are holders of decentralized currencies. And that's a real big problem. Now, I know right now in the news, there's been a lot of crypto headlines. What I would say to women is to go online in any community that you feel comfortable in. For me, it's Twitter. And also LinkedIn is another community I'm becoming more comfortable in. Find that community for yourself, and then also find like-minded creators. And again, these may be people that will create with you or people that will take you into another community that you can create it. There's also a lot of observers in the space, people who want to be active investors at some point. For me, investing in Web2 and creating a robust portfolio of women-led companies was really important to me. But I was also fortunate in that I've been around startups and been in the founder space for a very long time. It's not hard for today's American women to do that when these communities are at her fingertips. And then I also say, get excited about some new apps that are out there that are maybe starting. Reach out to their founders. For example, just recently I talked to one of the founders of MentorCam. It's a great startup where you can get in touch with people that are building out in Silicon Valley, and they'll give you business advice for a nominal fee, or you can join their membership program. I've also got my speech coach in a pocket, and it's an app called Orai, and they're doing it with artificial intelligence. So these are just two apps that I've mentioned that I love using, and they're small enough where you can reach out to their founding team and get excited and get involved and kind of grow with them. So I would really implore women to take much of the same strategy. Don't be afraid to enter a space just because there's nobody else that looks like you in it. Don't be afraid to walk into any new space as well. For example, real estate is something I'm becoming more interested in now too. And I'm willing to get into circles that I may not have been in before, simply by forging new connections.
Well, Rina, that's great advice. You've got a lot of interests. You got a lot of hats on. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Bob. It was a pleasure.